Hi guys, welcome to our lesson on gymnosperms. Gymnosperms are vascular seed plants, so we have two plants left, gymnosperms and angiosperms. So today we're going to be looking at vascular seed plants, also known as gymnosperms. Before we get started, here is the review from yesterday's lesson. If you could take the moment to pause the video and write this down and answer the questions. Remember that non-vascular plants don't have leaves, stems, and roots. Remember that they both are able to photosynthesize, and that vascular plants have phloem and xylem, and they both require moisture for fertilization. Okay, and so when we look at our cladogram, we see that now we have embryo protection, vascular tissue, and seeds in gymnosperms. Okay, so gymnosperms are a type of plants that are known as conifers, cycads, neophytes, and ginkgo. Now, you probably are most familiar with conifers. Conifers include pine, spruces, firs. If you celebrate Christmas, you probably have one of these in your household. So this is the conifers. You may have some cycads, which are not, you might have them in your front yard. They're used for household decoration. They look like trees or pine trees, but they are not. They're actual cycads plants. And they usually have a giant cone in the spring around this time in the middle. And then we have neophytes, which are basically part of plants in other countries. And then ginkgo, there's only one species left. These are ancient, and they're not in the United States anymore. But there used to be a lot of ginkgo, but they're no longer around. Okay, so we are going to be focusing on the seeds today. Remember, so far the way that we've learned about plants is that they use pollen to reproduce, right? And that pollen basically gets distributed and builds gametophytes. So this is going to change. It's a little bit different because now we're actually building a whole seed, which we don't know how to do yet. So that's going to be the part that is going to be changing in terms of the reproductive system. And so it's going to be a little bit more complex, but I'm going to do a really good job explaining it to you guys. So we had seen this picture before of the seed. So you have the seed coat here that protects the embryo. You have the embryo, and you have all this material here that basically feeds that embryo for a period of time. Now, when we look at cones, pine cones, for example, like my picture here, you might have seen this soft material. It usually is in the spring that looks like elongated fingers. And if they're soft to the touch, sometimes depending on the variety, there might only have one. Sometimes there may be a bunch, like in this picture. And then you have like the traditional cones that we know of, and sometimes you might have noticed that sometimes these cones are open, sometimes they look like they're sealed. Well, those are the different stages of the seed. So this hard part, this is the cone seed. So the pine cone seed is here. Now if you were to peel all of these scales back, you would see the seed in there. So the seed is actually the female, the female part, so the egg of the tree. And the soft material that you see here, this is the sperm of the tree. And of course, we don't call it sperm, but this is the way that I'm choosing to explain it to you because I want to make it clear. In the past, pollen with the other, when we studied vascular non-seed, the pollen could be female or male. In these plants, gymnosperms have male pollen, and that's going to be the same for angiosperms. So this pollen here that you see is male only, and then the seeds are female. So that's a difference. So this pollen is going to be blown by the wind, and it's going to enter the scales, in between the scales, to fertilize the seed inside. Once the seed is fertilized, this pine cone will begin to change, and it will be to close down. So the scales will seem to be like shutting down or closing off. And that's how you know that the seed is fertilized, because as you know, not all seeds would be fertilized. Not every egg is fertilized with sperm. Same in nature and same with plants. So the sperm is going to be blown by the wind, and it's going to enter into the seed, and it's going to fertilize the seed inside, and then the seed will take some time. Sometimes it's a year, sometimes it's 2, for the seed to actually fall off the tree and begin to grow a new tree. Okay, so let's talk in detail about the reproduction of these types of plants, of conifers and gymnosperms. Okay, so we are going to start by looking at the color of the cycle. And remember that because you see that this is tan, that means that the majority of this cycle, so remember that tan is diploid, right? So all of these are diploid stages, and the which is the sporophyte stage, and the blue is the gametophyte stage. So if you notice, there's only a couple of steps here, which is basically the fertilization of the seed, where this is considered to be and it's only this part that is considered to be in the gametophyte stage. So the tree is basically our sporophyte. So what you see in gymnosperms is you see pretty much the sporophyte stage. The gametophyte stage is not really visible for us humans. So I'm going to go ahead and start explaining how the cycle, the alternation of generations works with gymnosperms. So you have a tree that makes the cones. So remember, the cones are female, and then you have the soft material that is basically usually in a cluster, sometimes in a cluster, that is the sperm. And so through the process of meiosis, you develop, what we would call spores, the reproductive cells. But the female spores are called megaspores. And so the megaspores, if you take one of these little scales out, the megaspores would be at the end of those scales. And then the microspores would be all, that yellow material that like hangs on those fingered looking soft material of the cones. So what happens is you still have an archegonia, and remember that archegonia works like an ovary, right? So it holds the egg in place. And when the pollen gets blown by the wind, so this doesn't use water, that is another difference, this use wind. When the pollen of these yellow fingers gets blown by the wind, these microspores, incredibly, actually, the archegonia builds a little channel for this microspore to enter. And it enters, so this pollen enters here, and fertilizes the female gametophyte. So it fertilizes the female gametophyte, and then all of a sudden, when you have fertilization, you have a zygote. Okay, so this is in a way similar to what we've learned so far. However, at this point, the zygote would go through the process of meiosis and separate and make more gametophytes or sporophytes at this point. But instead, here, look what happens. After the zygote is made, we start making a seed. So this zygote actually continues this is why the process takes longer. It's more like a year for this cone to change. So this cone will begin to change, these scales will fall off, and what you have left is the seed. Now, once the seed falls off the tree, once the spine cone falls off and the scales fall out, you end up having the seed that, if the conditions are good, will then fall into the ground and will begin to grow a new tree, which then it will become a young sporophyte that then when it matures, it becomes a mature sporophyte. So as you can see, the majority of the time it's spent in the sporophyte stage. Okay. So a couple more things. Remember that wind is what is the predominant method for fertilization here. And then you may not have as much pollination here because it's dependent on wind, and so it might vary depending on the year. There's no insects that are needed or water. Only wind is needed for fertilization, and out of all the different pine cones that you see here, only a few will be fertilized. So those are the basic things to know. Remember to do your assignment and contact me if you have any more questions.